new tricks too, and that's important. So that's a good segue into a conversation that we had in the elevator. Your name again?
Ralph.
Ralph and I had, and Ralph asked me, what if you find yourself in an asset class that has to be reinvented? And I said, well, I think that's a great opportunity, because I think all asset classes have to be reinvented from time to time. And if you find yourself in an asset class, and it could be real estate, or it could be hedge funds, or it could be buyouts, or it could be venture capital, if you have an idea about how to do things differently and an approach that is well suited to whatever the new realities are of the business, I think you can outperform. And in the investment management business, that's what it's sort of all about at the end of the day, is being able to produce returns for your investors that are better than they can get elsewhere. So I think the venture business is, in some ways, in the process of reinventing itself. Some of it is actually just a back to basics movement. I think that having grown up in a firm that was built in the 70s and based on a lot of values that were built up at a time when there wasn't much money in the venture capital business, I have a fondness for a lot of the things that existed in the venture business back in the 70s and 80s. Less capital under management, less firms in business, smaller deal sizes, more syndication, more early stage investing, and I think that that's where the future of the venture capital business is. We have tried to scale the venture business. We, not necessarily me, although we did try it at Flatiron. You know, we raised over $550 million at Flatiron and had 25 people, and I found that that didn't work very well. And I think the venture business as an asset class has tried to scale and manage, billions and billions of dollars, invest billions and billions of dollars every year. And I think the venture business returns have suffered pretty mightily from that. And I don't think that venture capital is an asset class that scales very well. So I think that the reinvention of the venture business is a little bit back to basics in terms of some of the old school things that worked really well in the 70s and the 80s. And also, but one thing that was true about the 70s, 80s was everybody was a generalist. I think the future of the venture business is that everybody is a domain expert. If you're not a domain expert, then you probably don't want to be in the venture business. So I think we will see even more specialization in venture firms. And Union Square Ventures, Flatiron Partners, we said we were going to invest in just internet. And at the time, people thought that was awfully specialized. And when we started Union Square Ventures, we said we're just going to invest in web services. We're not even going to invest in software as a service. We're not going to invest in e-commerce and other things that people would put in. We're not going to invest in digital media. So we picked an even smaller slice of internet, and people thought that was awfully specialized. And I think that we have shown that you can make that model work if you manage a modest amount of capital and don't try to be bigger than you can actually deploy capital intelligently. So that's kind of what I was thinking I would talk about. I'm going to turn this into a Q&A session, but before I do that, I think a good segue. Milt Pappas told me one time that there are only 3 things that matter in a venture deal. Only 3 things that you really have to get in a negotiation in a venture deal. And so I thought I would throw it out, see if people could guess what those 3 things are. Hopefully you've all spent a little bit of time on term sheets and know a little bit about deals. So I'll let everybody raise their hands, and you can throw out your guesses. And if you get one right, we'll we'll retire that one, and then we'll keep going until people get all three. So who's brave enough to throw out the first one?
Management?
Management rights.
Yes.
So.
No, sorry, the relationship, if I understood your question.
Well, so I'm actually talking about specific terms that you would see in a term sheet. So things that people would actually end up having in documentation.
Not even want a majority or at least controlling part of the board.
So Milton didn't think that was important. Some people think it's very important. I actually don't think it's that important, but there are many people in the business who think that's important.
Liquidation preferences.
Liquidation preference is one of them. Does everybody know what that is? Yes, no? Yeah, if you don't, I'm happy to tell you what it is. Liquidation preference means that if you're the founder of the company and you own common stock, then I'm going to negotiate for a security. It's usually called a preferred security that has a liquidation preference. What that means is that if we sell the company, I'm going to either get my ownership times the sale price, or I'm going to get my cost back. And the reason that's important is, let's say that you and I agree to, I'm going to put $1 million in for 10% of the company. So the company's nominally worth $10 million. I own 10%, I got $1 million at risk. You started the company, you don't have any capital at risk, but you own 90% of the company. And then the very next day, someone comes along and says, I'll pay you $5 million in cash for your company. And you say, hey, that's great. I own 90% of it. I'm going to get $4.5 million out. This guy who bought 10% of the company, he's going to get $500,000. Well, that's not a very good deal for the person who just put $1 million in and bought 10% of the company. So the liquidation preference solves that problem by saying, I can choose to take my million, or I can choose to take my 10%.
Right of first refusal for follow-ons.
Correct. The preemptive right, as it was called when Milton told me this, they started to call this right of first refusal for follow-on. So that says that if I buy 10% of the company, I'm going to get the opportunity to buy 10% of every round in the future. The reason that's so important is if they do a down round, meaning that the price goes from 10 million down to 1 million, as long as you have that right to buy 10% of the financing, you're not going to get diluted. And if the price comes way, way down, it's not even going to cost you very much to maintain your ownership. So it's really very critical provision.
Using my valuation.
No, actually, not Milton's very important. Valuation is very important. I think he probably didn't really mean valuation. He probably wasn't even thinking valuation. I think he was saying, once you agree on valuation, the three things that you really need. All right, so I'll give you the third one. The third one's a board seat. And the reason the board seat's important is that you really don't know what's going on in a company, really even if you have a board seat. But you really don't know what's going on in a company if you don't have a board seat. And the board position really gives you certain governance rights, also gives you certain obligations and fiduciary responsibilities, which at times can be very cumbersome and many people don't really want to deal with. But his basic point was, and I sort of subscribe to this theory, once you get the valuation right, and you got a good relationship with the managing, which I think is absolutely critical, wouldn't do a deal without it. The three legal points that you really cannot give up are board seat, liquidation preference, and preemptive right. There's a lot of other things that people spend a lot of time negotiating for, like registration rights and right of first refusal and co-sale rights and anti-dilution protection and all these other things, which are all important. I don't mean to suggest that they're not, but his view was that you could probably give up all of those, and if you had the three most important terms, you could probably make a deal work.